Imarisha Kenya na Farm Kenya. Kenya, Farm Kenya. Imarisha Kenya na Farm Kenya. Kenya, Farm Kenya. Imarisha Kenya na Farm Kenya. Kenya, Farm Kenya.
Welcome to AgriTalk. On today's show, we'll be talking about standards, compliance and regulations in the horticultural sector. And today with me in studio is Patrice Genga, who is a technical officer at the Fresh Produce Exporters Association of Kenya. Welcome to the show, Patrice.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at FPIC.
So my name is Patrice Genga. I work with FPIC as a technical officer. So what FPIC does, we represent the exporters of fresh fruits, vegetables and cut flowers. What we do for them is advocacy and lobbying. We give them market information, and then we also offer capacity building and also support them to support the industry basically to comply to the necessary market standards which are required.
Okay.
Yes.
When we talk about compliance, why is it important that we have this conversation on compliance standards and regulations?
For one, it's what the market requires, the export market especially. And secondly, if we do what these standards say, we actually guarantee the conservation of the environment. We also guarantee food safety. We guarantee that we are taking care of the workers. We also guarantee that the natural resources that we are using, we don't deplete them. So in a way, they make sure that we practice sustainable agriculture.
Okay.
Yes.
So when we talk about standards, what are these standards?
The standards are basically the market requirements. It's what the market asks you to do if you would like to trade with them. So what happens is they give you a list of requirements which you need to fulfill for you to be able to trade with the market. When I keep saying the market because it's, if you don't comply to what they ask of you, then you won't be able to trade with them. So at the end of the day, it facilitates trade.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there specific standards for fresh produce?
Yes.
Or they are general?
They are kind of general, but it also depends on the market. There is one common one, which is global gap, which if you would like to trade with the EU, for example, you need to implement it. In the same EU, there are certain supermarkets which have developed their own standards. So they don't necessarily require you to implement global gap, but they ask you to implement their own standards, which they use to outsource produce.
Okay.
Yes.
Of the same produce that our farmers produce, do they just stick to standards for crops for export or even those ones for the local market?
If you're doing crops for the export market, then you need to implement the standards which are meant for that market destination which you're targeting. For the local market, we have a regulation which is KS 1758, which is now it's actually the horticulture code of practice. So every player in the value chain is expected to implement KS 1758. There is part 1, which is for flowers and ornamentals, and then part 2, which is for fruits and vegetables. The difference between the two is there's the food safety aspect, which now comes in the fruits and vegetables. So that is how the part 1 differs with part 2.
Okay.
So this standard is what every farmer, transporter, aggregator, exporter, retailer needs to implement, so as we ensure that we deliver safe food into the market.
Okay.
Yes.
So far, how is it especially for whatever we're exporting to mostly Europe, because I understand most of our produce go to Europe. How has it been for crops or vegetables that have been coming from Kenya? Do we meet these standards, and what are the penalties when we don't?
Yes, we do meet. That's why the export horticulture is one of the highest income earning activities for our country, because in 2019 we brought in over 150 billion in shillings. So that shows actually we are able to meet the requirements of the market. So on the penalties side, what happens is if you don't meet, then the market doesn't take in your produce. So if it is a certain product which you've sent and then there's an issue, let's say the chemicals which are in the produce has exceeded, so what happens is that produce can't get into the market. It's rejected at the border point, so it can't get in. So that's a loss to you. And then disposal is also a cost to you. So this standard actually also is used as a marketing tool, because if you've implemented this standard, then the consumers, they are buying the produce from the shelves in the supermarket. They are sure that these French beans, these avocados, these mangoes are actually produced in a conducive environment. The people who are growing them are not mistreated. The environment which they were grown in has been maintained well. The water which was used was clean. The handling was done properly. So it gives them assurance that this produce has been cultivated in a good manner.
Okay.
So it's also a selling point for our products.
Okay.
Yes.
You talked about disposal. If a particular product does not meet the market standards, when they're disposing it, you are charged. So is it sent back, or it's destroyed there, but you're the one to...
You decide. If you want to ship it back, you can ship it back, but you can...
It's cheaper.
It actually depends on you.
Okay.
But most people find it cheaper to destroy it at source, because again, you need to load it back either on the ship or on the airport, and then you pay that only to come and destroy it again.
Okay. Okay. So when we talk about regulations, what are regulations?
The difference between standards and regulations, when we say market standards, if you feel that that particular market is too strict, then you are able, you cannot, it's not a must for you to implement this standard, because you find it a bit too strict. But for regulations, there is no debate. You have to do it. It's a must, basically.
Regulations are must?
Yes.
Standards are debatable?
Yes.
Okay.
So if the market asks for global gap and you find that it's too hectic for you, then you can't implement global. You don't have to implement it. You'll just find another market which is not hell-bent on that standard. But on regulations, now you can't debate. It's the law. You have to do it.
Okay.
Yes.
So when we talk about the standards, how do you help your members now meet these standards? What are some of the things that FPIC is doing to ensure that all their members meet the standards?
For one, we sit in the different committees. For example, we're also a member of Global Gap. So that means if there are any changes in the Global Gap standard, which changes every 4 years, so we are able to get that information beforehand, and also we are positioned to be able to negotiate on behalf of the industry to maybe adjust some issues, because Global Gap added an aspect of GRASP, which is the social aspect. So FPIC hosts the National Technical Working Committee. So this committee now looks at the challenges which might come in as we try to implement these standards, and then communicate that to them, and then they assist. Locally, also it's cow disease, which in the early 90s was a bit prevalent. So those are the things that actually triggered the formation of Europe Gap. And then after a while, after around 2004, now they expanded and changed the name to Global Gap to now include the whole world in general. So now, Global Gap is a private standard actually. It's the headquarters are in Cologne, Germany. So with the name Global Gap now, even Kenya can actually ask people who are importing food into our country to implement. And Global Gap doesn't necessarily look at horticulture alone. It looks at even there's an aquaculture module, there's a livestock module, and then there's also the fisheries module, and then finally the crops module. So depending on what crops you're dealing with, even flowers, tea, coffee, we also have in the aquaculture, they look at fish. In the livestock, they look at milk, meat, eggs, poultry, all those things.
Okay.
So it's a broad thing, but for us in the horticulture sector, we only focus on the crops based and then fruits and vegetables or flowers and ornamentals, depending on what you're dealing with.
Okay.
Yes.
Standards, are they country specific or?
They're market driven.
Okay.
Yes.
So you talked about the difference between standards and regulations. Which ones are the same all over the world? The regulations?
They are not the same per se, because Kenya might have different regulations from those in Europe. But you have to do what the EU says. And if you are trading with Kenya, you have to do what Kenya says. That's a regulation. It's not the same. They might be similar. They might be almost the same, but they are not entirely the same because they also have different names and codes. But now standards, they are market driven. Even a supermarket here in Kenya can decide to develop their own standard. Produce.
Okay.
So it is you as the market to decide what you want and the kind of thing, because what standards basically look at is how something was produced, what is being produced, where was it produced, and who produced it.
Okay.
So you might choose to focus on the environmental aspect and ignore one aspect, which is okay. But at least you need to answer those four: who, where, what, and how.
Okay.
Yes.
So as FPIC, how many members do you have?
Currently, we are at around 100 and over 160 because the number keeps changing. You might have a new member who was just registered today, but it's over 160 members.
Okay.
Yes.
We remember 2020 was a very difficult year.
Yes.
We all know COVID markets were closed. How did that affect your members? And did it compromise on some of the standards you?
Actually, implementation of these standards benefited us because at first when there was the lockdown on the transport, there was a bit of a challenge because there were no planes flying, so it was difficult to ship our produce to Europe. But with time, the demand of food also went up. So what happened is, because they know that we do a good job in implementation of standards and following the regulations of the European market, so we actually did quite well, and the value of trade actually went up last year.
Okay.
Yes.
So you guys benefited from COVID? You can say so.
Not really.
A few.
Especially the sale of fruits and vegetables went up.
Okay.
Flowers was a bit hit because they don't consider flowers to be essentials.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we talk about standards again, are standards superior to Kenyan laws?
No. The Kenyan law, the Constitution 2010 is what determines how we live. That's why regulations are pegged on the Constitution. So you can't have a standard that says that you do something which is contrary to the Constitution. So, no.
But has there been a case whereby maybe a market is demanding this particular standard, but you guys maybe or your members don't want to implement it, or
no?
You've never had?
No. The challenges that we face is they can ask us to have tapped water everywhere, but we actually managed to tell them that we can have a container and then it has water and you'll still clean your hands. The issues are usually not based on law, but on the implementation bit.
Okay.
So we haven't had that.
So there must be a certification process.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about this process.
The certification.
And why it's important.
You know, for these standards, you just don't say that, okay, I'm implementing Global Gap, I'm implementing Tesco Nurture, I'm implementing Marks and Spencer, or I'm implementing KS 1758. Somebody has to come and check. So you need to develop a system, a compliance system, generate, let's say, work instructions, which you need to display all over your farm. You also need to display the regulations, the rules on your farm. You also have to provide the hand washing facilities, the toilets, everything labeled, fill in the necessary records. And then after, also you need to have a training so that people understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. So after you've done all that, you conduct an internal audit. This is whereby you can have someone who is trained to conduct an internal audit on that standard, to come in, check your system, verify, look at where the issues are coming in, and then you're given time to correct if issues will be found. It's not necessarily a must that you find any issues. So if there was any issue, you tick that. After you've closed the non-compliance, you can now apply for a certification audit. So the certification audit is done by independent auditors. Usually there are certification bodies which have been allowed to conduct the audits on behalf of the owners of the standard. So an example of a certification body in Kenya, there's DNV GL, there's Bureau Veritas, there's React Sat, there's NSF, a number of them. So if you now apply to them, and then you agree on the charges and the details, and then now you set a date for the audit. Now the auditor, when they come to your farm, the first thing they ask for is your internal audit report. So what happens, they now look at what the internal auditor did and then check what is happening during the audit.
Okay.
Yes.
So you cannot export anything before you are certified?
You can. If the market doesn't ask for certification, you can.
Okay.
Yes.
And for those markets that ask for certification, is it a one-off thing or?
No. That certificate is valid for 12 months. But in between, you can have the certification body. There's something that we call a surveillance audit. This surveillance audit now, remember, on the initial certification, you've been given time to prepare so that the auditor comes in. Now the surveillance audit, they give you a notice of 48 hours. So if you're not prepared, then you won't be prepared. They come to check, because 48 hours is not a long time if you look at it. Let's say if you haven't updated your records for the longest time. Yes.
Okay. So how long does, maybe you've answered the question. I wanted to ask, how long does it take to be certified?
It depends. It depends on, one, the size of the farm and the type of certification, because is it option one? Option one means an individual farm. There's option one single site. There's option one multi-site, whereby it's one single farm, but you have other production areas which are not very far from this main one. So that's one. Then there's option 2, which now targets group certification. This is mainly what we use to certify the small-scale farmers. So the small-scale farmers usually form a group. We come into an agreement. They come into an agreement. They form a group. They register that group to be a farming group, and then you develop a quality management system, which is like a constitution of the group regarding the farming processes. So they use that quality management system to do the farming. So this makes, if one farmer is not doing what is expected, then the whole system is faulted, because this one person can bring in the issues, other issues, when the produce gets into the market.
Okay.
Yes.
Where does traceability fall in all this?
Traceability falls in from start to finish. It starts in the farm and ends with the consumer. And what ensures traceability is documentation. Remember, traceability is there to address any issues if they ever arise. So if there was an issue, let's say on it's a chemical which was found, a chemical residue which was found on the produce, you need to check your spraying instructions, who sprayed, the spraying records, the particular dosage which was sprayed, on what day, what is the PHI of that particular chemical, and then you can now check. So traceability cuts across from beginning to end, and from end to beginning. It goes both ways.
Okay.
Yes.
On the same, on certification, you talked about audit. Is audit only done when I'm given, I'm told they'll come and audit me, or sometimes it's done impromptu?
An audit can't be impromptu, not unless it's a surveillance audit.
Okay.
Yes.
So how often is the surveillance audit, and why is it important?
At least once in the 12 months. Why it is important? Because when we are doing the audit today, you might have everything working very well. Your system might be very good. But 2 weeks later, you've stopped doing what you are supposed to do. And you remember, if you've ever been involved in an audit, the report says on the day of the audit, this was found. On the day of the audit, this was found. And that's why we have the surveillance audit, to come now and get,
just to confirm,
check whether you're still doing what is expected of you.
Okay.
Yes.
So what are the penalties?
If you're not doing the right thing, the certification will be withdrawn. Yes.
And what are the consequences?
You have to begin the process again. That's a cost.
How long does the process take?
Now it depends again on the size of farm. You can't compare certifying a 2-acre farm to a 10-acre farm, because the documentation is a bit bigger. Also, if you're doing option 1, which is one farm, is not the same as when you're doing a group certificate option 2. Because if you're doing option 2, that means you might be having maybe at least 20 farmers in a group. So you might have a big group of 100 farmers, and then you see preparing 100 farmers takes a longer time. It takes more money also. So the penalty is you have to begin again.
So it means those penalties will also mean whatever I had in the farm, I might lose it.
Yes, because again, you don't have a valid certificate to trade with. So you stand to disappoint your customer.
But you've never had instances whereby I had issues with my certification. I go to my neighbor and tell him, let me give you my...
People try to do that, also, of course, but it's discouraged. Because in case an issue is found, this is where integrity comes in. Because if an issue arises, they don't say company A is the one which made a mistake. They say Kenya made a mistake.
Okay.
So we try as much as we can to encourage our members and other exporters which are not our members that we all need to do the right thing, and we all need to play our part, because at the end of the day, if an issue arises, it's not your company which suffers, but the whole country. And as I had mentioned, if we mess up with this industry of ours, then we stand to lose over 100 billion every year.
Okay. So who can be certified? If I have a quarter of an acre, do I still stand?
Yes, you can be certified, but you need to also think of it needs to make business sense to you, because it costs money. So why spend 100,000 to grow, to get this certificate, while you can only produce so little? That's why small scale farmers get certified as a group, because now you combine their sizes of land to become one big piece of land.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We'll take a short commercial break, and when we come back, we'll continue with this conversation.
Okay.
From the Turkana Lake to the Masai Plains, from the Mijikenda coast to the rocky Luya land, Foods of Kenya is back to bring you the glory of these great foods.
We are not actually vegetarians. We eat meat, fish, everything.
Those of us who've had very difficult time trying to make round chapatis, this is your solution.
Foods of Kenya invites you to join this culinary adventure.
We value your feedback and welcome any comments, queries or complaints regarding our programs. You can get in touch with us on SMS 22071. Call us on 0719 012 450. You can also send us a letter on our post office box 30080-00100 or deliver it to our offices at Standard Group Center, Mombasa Road, Nairobi.
Welcome back to AgriTalk. On today's conversation, we are talking about compliance standards and regulations. And with me in studio has been Patrice Genga, a technical officer at FPIC, who has been breaking it down for us, what compliance means, why standards and regulations are important, especially for those exporting horticultural crops. Before the break, Patrice, you're telling us who can be certified. And you said even if regardless, even if your farm is small, you can come together as small-scale farmers and be certified as a group. So what are some of the challenges? There must be challenges when it comes to these certifications.
One of the challenge, the first one is money. Certification is not cheap. You have to invest a certain amount of money for the whole process. Second thing, time. If you're certifying a farmer group, depending on the number, you might need a long time, even during preparation of the certification. So you might take 2 months to prepare them, and that costs time and money. The other thing is, if you're doing option 2, which is a group certification, having so many grown-ups to reason as one, it's another challenge, because you will always find that one person who wants to be on the wrong side.
Okay.
So there's also that. And then the other thing is basically the group dynamics, if there are wrangles in between. there has to be a proper structure of the leadership of the group. If the group doesn't agree with the leadership, then the wrangles, which means that you'll take more time. You might need to, you might actually fail the audit, because if two farmers decide that they won't show up on the day of the audit, or they won't do what you've asked them to do, that's another issue. So
what are the penalties if I was to appear today and we decide we are not coming?
Now the group decides. Remember, as you form a group, you need a constitution for that group. As you register it with the government, you need to have a constitution, so you need to decide. That's why I was saying the wrangles also come in, because I've seen groups which could make it, which could benefit from certification, but because they don't read from the same script, the whole process just crumbles. So the issues normally are mainly on the finances side of it, and the time aspect of it. And sometimes people don't see the value of getting certified. That's why I was saying you need to see what the market wants. You might find a farmer who says, hey, global gap is a lot of work. I don't think I can manage to do it. Or this other standard is also a bit too hectic. It's a bit bulky for me.
So it's not a must?
Yes, if you're doing a market standard, it's not a must. But if you're dealing with regulations, you have to do it.
Okay.
Yes.
Another thing that I'm trying to understand here is, during this time of audit and certification, you said it's a very long process. What happens to the produce in the farm? Does it still go to the market, or it's...
Yes, you need to time the audit with what is on your crop. Because one thing, for the audit to come in, it needs to come in, it has to coincide on a date when you are harvesting. Because one of the things that we look at from production, from site selection. This is site selection. We look at where the farm is. Did you do a risk assessment on the farm? Did you do a risk assessment on the water which you're using? Did you do a risk assessment on the health and safety issues which you might find in the farm? So after we look at all that, we come to fertilizer. On fertilizer application, did you conduct a soil analysis? Where did you buy your fertilizers? Who advised you to apply the fertilizer? So again, you need to show proof that you have a competent and qualified person advising the farmer. The next thing we look at after fertilizer is issues of agrochemicals. Why are you spraying these chemicals? Because you need to have conducted scouting to check whether these pests that you are controlling actually exist in your farm. With these diseases that you want to control, do they exist in your farm? So there's also that. After you've finished with the issues of agrochemicals, now you come to harvesting. What's your procedure of harvesting? Who conducts the harvesting? Have your harvesters been trained? Do they have the proper gear? So that the auditor needs to see as you're harvesting. Remember, during audit, you can do interviews, you can observe, and you can ask questions. So the auditor needs to see for himself as you're harvesting, because you've written a very good procedure that you're saying that my harvesting procedure begins with washing hands. And then, as the auditor, I'm there at your farm, and then I see the worker just come from wherever, just walk in, start harvesting. Now I fault you on that.
Okay.
Yes. So you need to time your auditing date to coincide with a harvesting date.
Okay.
Yes.
So that also means I have to train my staff?
Yes, definitely. If you don't train your staff, then they won't do what is expected. Again, they need to understand why they are implementing this standard. because you might, as an auditor, I'm allowed to speak with the workers in your absence. So I asked them, are you provided with the necessary equipment? No. Why do you think we insist on you to wash your hands? The boss said that, their response is, the boss said that we do it. So they don't understand why
They are doing it,
but they are doing it. So that shows there is a disconnect in the system, because if they are doing because the boss is saying, one day they might decide to not do it.
Because the boss is not there.
Yes.
Okay. There's another thing you talked about, fertilizer, applying fertilizer, and the type of fertilizer. Why is that important?
One, it's we look at the soil condition. Fertilizer use, as contrary to what a number of people think, fertilizer doesn't necessarily destroy your soil, but how you use it is what determines whether your soil will remain in good condition or not. And that's why we also encourage, you need to conduct a soil analysis, check what is in the fertilizer, and then we also advise you, the farmers, to do crop rotation, because if you don't rotate your crops, then again you exhaust that kind of soil. Like if you grow maize, the soil which you use to cultivate will be not so thick, because the roots for maize are a bit shallow. So you need to show and prove that you actually conduct rotation.
Okay.
Yes.
On that rotation issue, there are farms I've seen since I was in primary school. They've been going flowers year in, flowers out, year out on the same piece of. How do they rotate when they're only doing flowers?
The flowers most people don't grow flowers on the soil. They bring in a medium, like pumice. Okay. So when this pumice is exhausted, they bring in a different medium.
Okay.
Yes.
So how do you tell they brought in a different medium?
Records.
I can lie in my record.
If you lie in your records, then at some point the story won't be complete. Because if you keep saying one thing, then we follow the trail. That's where traceability comes in. If you changed your medium, then production has to go up at some point.
Okay.
But if it doesn't, it keeps going down. It shows that you didn't do what is expected of you.
Okay, as FPIC,
yes.
During all this time you've been doing this, have you seen your members grow, or
yes,
it got to a point they also disappeared?
Like any other business, some businesses will weather the storm, some don't. Along the way, some people decide, okay, enough in this export business, let me try something else. So they close shop. Sometimes the market influences our membership, because we had, there was a time that we had so many companies, like over 100 companies which were in Kenya now, which were exporting chili to Europe. And then the regulations of exporting chili into Europe changed.
Okay.
So they required you to grow the chili in a controlled environment. Most of these companies were depending on small-scale farmers, so that changed the dynamics all of a sudden. So if your livelihood was based on chili, you see, if small-scale farmers, most of them won't afford to put up greenhouses and shade nets. So that forced a number of companies to close shop. In 2013 again, when the EU also threatened to stop exporting our French beans because of the MRL issues. A good number of companies also didn't make it because the regulations became a bit too strict. Then you didn't have the money to invest into the proper systems. So that's it.
So when we talk about the challenges that are in this sector, do you also have challenges whereby the small-scale farmers are feeling the large-scale farmers are trying to push them out? Do you come across as an organization And how do you deal with those kind of issues?
Yes, of course, the small-scale farmers most of the time will feel like they're at a disadvantage from the bigger farmers, because this big farmer can actually plant 10 acres of what this group is producing as an individual and finance it through the production process. So yes, they do feel sometimes that they are being disadvantaged, but the way the export market works is the export market is heavily reliant on small-scale farmers, especially on crops like avocado and French beans. Okay. So we came up, when I say we, I mean Kenya. Now that includes FPIC and the government and all the other players. We came up with contract farming. So these exporters get into a contract with the farmers, and then they agree on what crops to grow and the mode of payment on collection and things like that. And then when this farmer harvests this produce, exporter comes and collect, and then they pay them. So that has made them feel a bit more included in the system. And we also, the government also and us also work with them to train them, to encourage them, to show them that compliance is not as complicated as they think. It's something that they can do. You just need to keep your records as you should, and labeling here and there. And I can attest that there are farmers who have benefited heavily from growing things for export.
Okay.
Yes.
You also talk, when we're talking about challenges, you said sometimes these small farmers or small organizations, sometimes they have their own wrangles. As an organization, do you have a body that tries to help them maybe resolve some of these issues?
As FPIC, we don't have that, but sometimes if we have a project which can facilitate training on group dynamics, then we roll it down to the farmers. Okay. But with farmers mainly, just pay them in time and things like that, and you'll be good. So these contracts have actually gone a long way in addressing such issues, because money is also not paid through the group. It's paid to the individual farmers, depending on the volumes which you harvested.
Oh, so when they're exporting, it comes, each farmer produce this much?
Yeah.
So when the money comes, it goes directly to
your, as per your production.
Okay.
So if you produce less, you get less money.
Okay. Yeah. We also understand that agriculture is a devolved function. I don't know, how do you work with both the national and the county governments implementing some of these things? And what are there any challenges?
The biggest challenge is extension in agriculture is basically dead. So the county agricultural officers are not properly facilitated to visit the farmers. So that brings an issue. And what we have done as the export horticulture sector, our members employ agronomists and technical staff which work with the farmers directly to make sure that they actually do what is expected of them. They also advise them on what chemicals to use, what fertilizers, when, and how, and other issues that come in. So this agronomist, this technical assistant who is on the ground, will be with the farmer all through the way from planting until harvesting. Then during harvesting, they are present. They write the quantities which you've harvested, and then they facilitate the payment. So for the difference, what we do, we actually, now the export horticulture took over the extension from the government, because we realized if we don't have people working with the farmers, then the farmers will do things which are not right, and then issues start coming up.
Okay. We've also had issues at times when workers on some of these farms come out and complain about either the the chemicals they're using are affecting them. Some have come out complaining that they are not given protective gear. What does FPIC do in such cases? Do you wait until the next audit, or you go through, what really happens in such cases?
Remember, FPIC is not involved in the production processes of this thing, but our members are. So depending on our level of involvement, we might advise or train, but at the end of the day, every exporter takes care of their farmer.
Okay.
Or unless we have a project or the exporter approaches us to help them facilitate the certification process. So we as FPIC can't go to the farm because we are also not auditors. But now when the auditor comes to the farm and then they talk to the workers and then they say they haven't been given the proper protective equipment, then the auditor needs to give a non-compliance on that particular clause. And that should stop. You should not be given a certificate based on that, because if you're not providing, then you're not taking care of your workers. Yes.
Okay. I asked that because I remember recently there was an investigative piece on one of the farms around here. I think they were exporting avocados and it had such issues. And the market in Europe responded. I don't know, how does that affect production, and how does also that affect your member?
No one, it reflects badly on that company. Secondly, it reflects badly on Kenya, because if this is one company, let's say if they are a major player, then if this major player is not doing the right thing, what does it say about the rest? Okay. So it puts Kenya in bad light, so restrictions start becoming a bit more strict and things like that. And that's why we also responded by showing proof that we've done everything. You also tell the success stories. So that's one of the repercussions of not implementing the standards, because some markets have that, the social aspect of it. Because if you're mistreating your people, then why do we need to buy your produce? Okay. Just like there are people who can't use smartphones because of the issues that surround mining of things. So it depends.
Okay.
Yes.
My other question would be, I've also seen some of these huge supermarkets in Europe sending a representative or two, or they come up together and send representatives to visit some of these farms.
Yes.
Is that part of an audit, or what exactly is that, and how do you, as FPIC?
It's part of, it's like a surveillance audit actually, because now the people from Europe come here to see if we are doing what they asked us to do if we want to trade with them. Sometimes they actually say that they are coming, so you prepare on the places to visit. They'll mostly visit the small-scale farmers in where most of the produce comes from. So you can imagine if you're not doing the right thing, and then these inspectors say that they are coming, and you have, let's say, 5 days to prepare. You see, it puts you in a lot of pressure, and you might have very many mistakes as they come to check, because you will find someone has used the wrong dates, for example. You might find someone saying that they sprayed on 30th of February. That automatically shows that this thing never happened. So that's why once you get certified, it's easier if you keep doing things real time. Because if you allow things to not move for a long time, then when the surveillance audit comes, then you're not ready for it.
Okay.
Yes.
Are these surveillance sometimes impromptu, or they always let you know?
They have to let you know.
Okay. Why is it important that they let you know?
So that they don't come and find nobody in the farm.
Also that you can organize the farmers too.
You have to be available.
Okay.
You can't do an audit to someone who is not present. So you need to be told so that you're present.
Okay.
Yes.
In all these things, when it comes to standard compliance and regulations, are there other, apart from the supermarkets, are there maybe bodies of the countries we export to that you work with?
As FPIC, not really, because the bodies now that regulate, remember, government can only speak to government. So in Kenya, we have something, worldwide, we have every country has a National Plant Protection Organization. For Kenya, that is KEFIS. So when the NPPOs of different countries have an issue or they want to introduce another regulation, what they do, they communicate to KEFIS. And then KEFIS now disseminates that information to us. And then if there are issues, we communicate to KEFIS, and then KEFIS now relays that information back to them. That's how we communicate.
Okay.
They can't just send to anyone. If there's something that they would like us to change in terms of, let's say, French beans, let's say they want to increase the sampling percentage, they tell KEFIS, and then KEFIS now communicates that to the industry.
Okay.
Yes.
Apart from Europe, do you have any new other markets or other markets that
Yes.
we've been supplying? And how are their regulations and standards?
We also trade with the UAE. We trade with Asia. China also is another market that we are looking to get into. We are also looking to get into the American market, USA. We also want to increase our market share in Australia. So Europe is our main market, and it's also a bit strict. UAE is also a good market, not as strict as Europe, but it's also an important market. Australia, again, they also have their own regulations. Like they require us to fumigate our flowers before we ship them, before they leave Kenya. Okay. So that's a requirement for the Australian market. For European market, not as much.
Okay.
So different markets, different requirements, different regulations.
Okay. I also understand there's something they call the cold chain that has to be maintained from the farm to the market. How do you help your small-scale farmers to maintain this cold chain from the farm?
That's one thing that we brag about as a country, because it takes around 48 hours by the time a product has been harvested here in Kenya for it to be on the shelves in Europe. And this is where the exporters now come in, because they are the ones who go for the produce at the farm and they transport them immediately to their respective pack houses. And within that day, they are processed and then packed, ready for shipment. The next day, or that evening, they might be loaded on a plane. So in the morning, they're in Europe and they're in the supermarkets. Okay. That is if they pass the check at the entry point in Europe. If they check and they agree that, okay, this is good, there are no chemicals, there are no pests, so it gets into the market.
Okay.
Yes.
As we wind up, if we compare ourselves with our competitors in the region, where are we when it comes to compliance standards and regulations? And who are our biggest competitors when it comes to horticulture export?
We are among the best, if not the best. So we boast of a good record of compliance. We actually have the most number of small-scale farmers certified under Global GAP. So that's something that we boast of. Our competitors regionally, I would say, for flowers, maybe Ethiopia. For avocados, maybe South Africa.
Okay.
But worldwide, Africa, we come out on top.
Okay.
Yes.
There was a conversation I was having some time back, and someone told me for the first time, I think last year, Kenya exported avocados to South Africa, which was a first.
It was not a first, it was after a long time, after a while.
Ah, okay.
Yes, because we've been exporting avocados to South Africa for a while, but then we had an issue with the fruit fly.
Oh, okay.
So they basically imposed the ban on our avocados to South Africa. That ban lasted for 13 years.
Ah, okay.
So 13 years, and then they said, okay, we've lifted the ban because we are satisfied that you're dealing with the pests and you can't export that pest to us. So after 13 years, it becomes difficult again to go back to a market, maybe for new exporters. That's why we've been trading with them until the ban was lifted, I think, 2 years ago.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Okay. That is it for today. I want to say thank you very much for sparing time to be with us.
Thank you.
I'm sure our viewers also have benefited from this conversation on compliance standards and regulations. And those who have been thinking of joining the export market for especially for horticulture have learned a thing or two. And we will invite you again.
Thank you.
Until next time, that is it from AgriTalk today. Thank you.
Post-harvest loss salt testing for grain moisture. In order to store your grain, you will need to dry it first. However, you also need to make sure your grain is dry enough to store. If your grain is too moist, it will lose quality in storage. In the following animation, we will explain how to check if your grain has a low enough moisture level for you to store it. Cereal grains must have a moisture content of 14% or less for storage. Beans must have a moisture